I help.
Okay, yes, so you should have it now.
I assume this is going to prompt me. Yes, okay.
Okay, so we are live. I think I've got the wrong title in in Twitch, so
I
let me
do that
try
all the time.
changing that really quickly. Yeah,
Do you,
sorry.
do you have Nightbot or anything running?
Uh, what is Nightbot?
So it lets you run. Um, it acts as like a bot moderator type thing, and you can use it to like. The way I use it is I give it commands. So like we could add a bang dot docs command, and then it would link to the um, GitHub Actions page. Is what I was thinking. We
Okay,
can. I can send you the information though for that.
okay, cool.
It's very convenient. And but one of the I thought of it because one of the commands is you can update the title just like through chat, and it's way easier than
Hmm.
when you forget.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, let me try screen sharing quickly, and then I'll let you screen share.
Okay. Yep.
So, I'm just screen sharing our title slide, um, which is exploring GitHub Actions with Tyler, aka Terabyte Tiger. It is now Thursday, September 3rd at 8:15 p.m. Eastern. So yeah, excited to talk to you about GitHub Actions. Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Hi, I'm Tyler. You can find me everywhere now as Terabyte Tiger online. Um, I've been doing development for about 3-ish years now, mostly HTML, CSS, and now more recently I've picked up a lot of Vue. And I gave GitHub Actions a whirl for the Dev2 hackathon, and we're going to talk about that.
Awesome.
Are you ready for me to screen share? Actually, give me one sec.
I am.
How do I?
Do you see the green button on Zoom?
Yep. Okay.
Okay, awesome.
I was looking for. Oh, there it is. Okay. I was trying to host through my Twitch. Okay. So, and let me move this over here. So we're gonna start with what what I built for the Dev2 hackathon. So I built what's called Happy PR, and Twitter absolutely loved this. So that's how we ended up here talking about it on the CodeBuddies stream. So my goal going into it was there's a npm package called sentiment, and that'll come up once we get to our JS files. And that lets you pass in some string of text and then feed back a resulting, it gives you a score from 0 or -5 to +5. And you can scale that however you want. But basically, -5 is this person's really mad, and +5 is this person's in a very good mood, very happy mood. So I found that package about 2 or 3 weeks ago, or 2 or 3 weeks before I built this, and I was just waiting for the right opportunity to use it. And when Dev announced their Actions hackathon, I was like, all right, this is it. This is where we're going to use it. So I decided, I was committed. I was like, we're going to do this, but I don't know anything about GitHub Actions. So before we get into what exactly a GitHub Action is, I think it helps to walk through how an action works, and then that kind of puts it into a perspective that allows you to further expand on from, okay, here's how this one works. Let's look at how we can apply this in different ways. So there are 3 key files here that we're going to be looking at. The first one is this action.yaml file, and that needs to be located in the .github workflows main.yaml. location of your action. So in here is basically just all of your metadata about the action, so that when you publish it to GitHub, which we've got here, when you publish it to GitHub, it'll look more presentable to anyone looking into the page. So like here we specify the yellow @ sign, and that's how it picks the icon and the background color of the for the action. The inputs, this is just everything that the user needs to have set and pass into the action in order for it to run. In this case, we're using this all caps GitHub token, and this is a signature token when it comes to actions. The GitHub token lets you run your command and respond. In this case, we're going to be responding to a new pull request as the actions bot, which we'll see in a second. And then you tell it where you want the action to run. So in our case, we're going to run from the distribution index.js. So what does this action do? Which would have been a nice starting point here. So when someone opens a pull request, I put amazing example. That's my comment I added when I created the pull request. And then our GitHub Actions bot responds with, you scored a 2 out of a possible +5 on the sentiment scale. It links the user to more information about that. And then it returns a GIF based on how happy or angry the person was. And in this case, we have the pig squealing from, I believe it was a old Geico or Progressive commercial. I think Geico. So that's the action.yaml file, and that's where all of that metadata kind of goes. So then we've got main.yaml. Oops, I had those backwards with the file locations. Main.yaml is where you tell it what the workflow is. And you can put multiple workflows in the same main YAML file, and then it'll run them in order and process through accordingly. So the first piece we have here is on pull request, and then we have the types of pull requests to run on. If you don't specify this, I believe it defaults to just open. But in my case, I wanted it to run whenever the user opened a pull request, or if a pull request got closed, we would want it to run when it was reopened. And my reasoning for that was if potentially someone who was using this action in the hypothetical world where this was going to be useful, they would see the user, or if they submitted a pull request that was a -5, -4, or -3, then you would want to automatically like cancel out that pull request and say, hey, try again, maybe with a little bit more pep in your step type thing. So when they reopened it, I would want the action to run again. And then if it's still in the negative window, we would want them to get kicked out again. So now that piece isn't fully implemented at this point, but that is something I would like to potentially add at some point. So then you've got your jobs that you want to run. This is the hello world job, which is just like essentially a block of jobs to run. You tell it what type of operating system you want to run on. And then you can type a name in, and that's a label that'll show up when you're running your actions, which we'll see when we look into where these are in GitHub some more. And then there's steps. This checkout one technically doesn't need to be here once you use if you're using this from some other repo. However, when you're running a local repo, you need to be able to check it out and grab the most recent information. And then we have this step, the mood analysis step. And this is where this action actually runs, which is this ./ file, which tells it to use the local latest version. You can give an ID, and then we pass in our GitHub token, which I mentioned earlier was how we can control and respond as that actions bot user on GitHub. So then we've got the index file, and this is the last bit of our 3-piece puzzle, essentially. And this is where all of the actual well, actual air quotes code goes. This is the code that runs every time the action is triggered. It'll run through and run this JavaScript file. And there's a few different languages you can use to write the actions. I use JavaScript because, as I mentioned earlier, this is the language I'm most familiar with. So it felt most natural to not try and learn a second language while trying to figure out GitHub Actions, while trying to figure out these other packages and such. So looking at this code a little bit, I've got a array of GIFs, which are what the responses will be, and they're in a ascending order from super angry to super happy. And then I've got the link and the alt text all here so that when it responds, it can make sure that it includes the alt text for accessibility purposes. And then we've got just this async function called run. And then at the bottom here, we just call that function. So if we step through the function, it has a try catch block. It does some console logging so that in case something breaks later on, we can go in, see what happened, and it's easier to diagnose our issues then. And it's also nice for the user. You can provide additional details for the maintainers so that in the case where your action is doing something that could impact the code, you would want to show the user or the maintainers, this is what happened. And you can use your console logs to generate that. So then here, I'm double checking that the user is making a pull request. And this GitHub context is an interesting bit, and we'll talk more about this later on. But the GitHub context is kind of like a extra, it's the context of the action that's happening. So it's everything that will be different, potentially different each time the action triggers. So like, for example, here we have the event name. So you can trigger GitHub Actions on basically anything. You can have it trigger on comments, on new pull requests, I believe on branches. There's a whole list, though, out there in the docs where you can check what all of those are. So then we grab our GitHub token, we sign in, we grab the pull request information, and then we create a let mood equal new sentiment. And this is where it starts to get interesting. So this creates a new sentiment for us, which is being imported at the top. And we calculate a result based on passing in the GitHub context payload pull request body, which is just a whole bunch of objects inside of objects to get the contents of the pull request. So in this example here, that body is amazing example, exclamation point, exclamation point. So we're running that through the sentiment package and we get a result. Then I'm calculating a result index so that we can, I'm essentially getting a whole number. So we're going to do a math round. We'll take that result dot comparative because the result is actually an object at this point with a couple different pieces of information that sentiment returns, including like an array of all of the happy words, all of the, I'll say angry words, and any neutral words. It'll like return an array and show you how it parsed that out if you want to return that in the console and kind of debug from there. So it's grabbing that comparative, which is a number from -5 to +5. We're adding 5 to it so that we get somewhere between 0 and 10. And then that's how long our GIF array at the top was. So we return the result. We grab what the alt text for the GIF is. We grab the link for the GIF, and then we create the message that we're going to return to the user. Then we have another try catch block here where we try to use OctoKit, which is another bundle that GitHub has for working with the GitHub API. This creates a new comment on the issue, which in this case is actually a pull request, which is something interesting that came up working with this, is that like issues and pull requests are essentially the same thing as far as the GitHub API is concerned. And that was a very interesting tidbit to try and figure out, because I was like, no, I'm not trying to create a comment on an issue. I was trying to create a comment on a pull request. And that was honestly probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks I hit with this, was just trying like, because it wasn't what I was expecting, but it was actually what I was trying to do when I was trying to search for how to do this. So that bit took quite a bit of time to figure out. So we pass in the repo, who the owner of the repo is, the issue number or pull request number, and then what the message is that we want to tag on. And if there's an error, it'll return that to the user, or to the maintainers. And then we create a payload, which just kind of spits out all of our JSON. And then we log, if the action happened on a non-pull request, we give the maintainers a little bit of pizza, just to let them know that something happened, so that they aren't worrying what happened, which is a mistake I made. Someone tried to use this before I had this bit in, and they like filed an issue and whatnot. And I eventually realized, oh, I should be double checking at every point to make sure that the user is following the path the correct path, even though, because when they create their action or their main YAML workflow file, they don't actually use this specific one. They're only adding this uses line, and that's referencing back to happy PR. And that's what caused the issue, was that I didn't have anything explaining that they had to add this on pull request, because I didn't realize that piece yet. And that's what caused that issue. And that's why we're using this only on pull requests, but also checking that the user is using a pull request in here. So that's how the action works. And that's how all of the code, all the code that we had to write to do that. There's still like a README, package lock, package file, all that good stuff, just for the general repo guidelines, community information and such. But these are the only 3 files that we really touch the whole time. But one other thing that we should point out here is, when this runs on another computer, in order for GitHub Actions to process it, it would have to run npm install every time it tried to run this. But they also don't want to run npm install every time, because what happens if you're not running a JavaScript project? Since we mentioned earlier, you can run with a bunch of different, you can use a bunch of different languages. So if you're not running JavaScript, you don't want to run using npm install, because that'll just not do anything. Like, you could do it, but you don't really want to if it's not accomplishing anything. So there's a package out here by Zeit, and that is this ncc build index.js. And what that does is takes our main index file that we're writing code in, and it creates this dist/index.js. And that's the file that's actually being run, which, as a JavaScript person, it was really weird having to run build commands again to get a compiled file. But what this does is it just dumps all of your npm files directly into a single file, so that it can just run this one instead of running, instead of having to do the npm install every time. It can just reference the file directly, which is also good because it lets you do some testing in different ways if you so desire. But mostly it was just a frustration to remember to do the build step. So that's that. So
Can you clarify, Tyler, what the builds command you were running was?
So we're running ncc build, and then we're specifying what I believe this is the input file, and then it creates the dist file out of this. So there's like an npm command, this one, and this will install the package globally for in your terminal, command line, whatever you call it. And then you can run the ncc build and then your file name, and that'll run the compile. And then like when you run this, and it'll just take a second, it'll just spit out that everything was successful here since it's working. And then at that point, you would see the index file be modified in your Git branch.
Cool. So as you said, you need to run that every time, basically before you deployed this, right?
Yep. Every time that you want to deploy this, you have to run that, or else you're going to be running on against an older version, essentially, which caused many headaches.
Yeah. Can I ask you another clarifying question?
Yeah, of course.
You imported sentiment at the top. Is that available to you because you added it as a package in action.yaml?
So this is actually the npm package. Which
Oh, this is okay, I see.
bring it up.
So if you look
Here.
in your like package.json, we'll probably see it there.
Yeah, so it was just I imported this package and then I kind of just followed through their like here's the install, and then they have these examples about how to use it, and you can clarify like certain if you want certain words to be more valuable or less valuable, you can clarify that in here. Which that would be just a complete can of worms to open into.
Okay, cool.
I can't imagine trying to create like a list of all of the code words that are positive or negative, and then like evaluating from -5 to +5 how much you want to value them. But it is there if you want to do it.
So in action.yaml, do you mind clicking back to action.yaml?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, actually, sorry, maybe I was thinking of main.yaml,
Yeah.
where it says, okay, so in terms of these steps, the first one is like a standard, you'll see this in a lot of GitHub Actions, right? Checking out the checkout.
So
Yeah.
these are actually the two different ways that you can add a workflow or an action, excuse me, to your GitHub repository. So this is referencing the GitHub repo actions/checkout and then version 2. And this is referencing the local action, which is happy PR.
So which file is that referencing? We're currently in main.yaml, so.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of really weird. So it's like two folders deep, but it's actually referencing this main block here. So like where the root folder where the
Oh, so whatever is index.js there.
Yeah, so then from here it picks up the action.yaml file, and then that's where it tells it here's what you're going to run.
Okay, cool. Thank you for explaining.
Yep. Yeah, that part was also very confusing because the way that I built this was definitely like this is my first time, I don't know what I'm doing approach, because I just followed exactly the hello world approach, which is why in the main YAML file here you actually see the hello world job as the job title. So I started with everything exactly as the hello world example, and then I slowly started morphing it into what I was trying to get to. And that's just the way that I always have like approached learning languages. And if I bring up, this was the first thing I found when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to go about or what I wanted to exactly do. And what this action does, this was another hackathon from a while back. And it's basically the same thing, but instead of running through a sentiment analyzer, it just returns a cat GIF every time. So I was like, oh, perfect. This is a great example. And then like a bunch of their code was like for an older version of actions. So it didn't actually help a whole lot. But it still helped give me a bit of a guiding direction towards what I had to do. And then we ended up here.
Nice.
Any other questions before we go on to, I guess I'll talk about how GitHub Actions fit into the ecosystem here.
Yeah, I do have a question about how you were debugging. Were you, as you were building things out, were you like trying to trigger your action by creating new PRs? Where did you see the error messages as you were?
So here you see 1 open pull request and 34 closed. I was just pushing it and creating I made a minor change to this test markdown file or my README, depending on which version I was on. And then I just created that pull request against it's against itself. And then I just like kept deleting and restarting that pull request. And then eventually up here somewhere, I added the ability to this one. That's where I added the ability to go against a reopened pull request, so that instead of having to cancel the pull request and then create a new one, I could just close it and open it again, and then it would run through a few times. So the way that this is actually probably a really good one for the showing that. So in the checks, yeah, this full screen. So under the checks, these are the actions that have run since this pull request was opened. And because it kept opening and closing the same branch against it, these checks built up to be 7 of them. And so like we've got the Git Guardian, which is just the GitHub's thing so that it can check to make sure you're not uploading secrets to public public repos. So then if I click in here, this is where the action shows up, and this is where all the console logs would show up. Each of those steps will show up here. So this is the output that GitHub gives you. So you've got the setup job, which is something that they do on their side to make sure that everything is getting ready. Then it does a checkout, and this will bring up your this is that checkout piece that they have running, and that's what you need for a local action. Then there's the mood analyze step, which is what my action is actually, which I probably should have just named this to be happy PR, but here we are. So here you can see the results that are returned actually by that sentiment package. So we were looking at the comparative score, but it also just returns the total score that the words generated. So it basically it takes your string or your sentence, breaks it apart into the words, and then it does kind of like compared to like JavaScript reduce, I believe it is, where it takes everything and creates a single number out of it. So it takes each of these words and says, is this word positive or negative? In this case, none of these were. And then it would build up a score, and then it divides it by how many words there were to start with. And then that's where the comparative score comes from. And then I'm not sure what this calculation does, but that's probably something with the language modifiers or custom dictionaries you can add. And then it has like your tokens, your words, positive, negative, that it spits out. And then
So
here,
it's based on how angry the person was when they wrote up their pull request.
Yeah. It's a fun way to find out if someone was someone on Twitter mentioned, they were like, it's a really good way to get a computer to yell at me when I'm already mad at computers. Was like the way that they phrased it. I was like, yeah, basically. So it runs this checkout action, which is on the GitHub's pre-built action side. It runs the mood analysis, and then it does a post checkout, which is just wrapping up that checkout action, and then it says it's done and finishes from there. So each of these is going to look extremely similar. I'm not even sure. I don't remember exactly what I was checking on this specific pull request, other than the ability to open and close and cause the action to run over and over again. But that's the one. This is how it looks when it comes out the other side.
Would it be possible to demonstrate what it looks like when it breaks? I don't know if it's easy to deploy.
I can show you an old one that was broken.
Sure.
And it should be basically any of these. So let's find out. I just need to make sure that I didn't like. I should have yelled at me if I. Okay, yeah, here. So like in this one, it's spitting out some issues, which are, I didn't understand how the GitHub token, like that it was just an actual pre-built included thing. And so I was trying to I was trying to create a GitHub token like for a gist type thing. and I kept passing it in, and it was like, sorry, you can't use this wording, and it's because it was clashing with the GitHub token is essentially a reserved keyword when it comes to actions. And that was actually probably another one of the most frustrating things, was like, it doesn't really tell you that anywhere. It just kind of assumes that you'll figure it out eventually, which was a general thing I found with working on this. The docs feel very incomplete. I think GitHub Actions might still technically be a like beta type project.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure of that. But the docs I definitely think the docs need a little bit of touching up yet to like stop those frustrations from happening for new people, hopefully.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Brian Douglas, who I think he's working on GitHub Actions, and I remember him mentioning he also Twitch streams, so I remember him mentioning that the docs need a few updates.
Yeah. Like, they're really good up until the point where you start deviating from the hello world example, at least for the JavaScript one. I don't know what the other languages are like.
Mm-hmm.
But like, as soon as I started deviating, it was like, well, I'm not really getting anything here. But I think they'll continue to grow. They'll continue to get
Yeah.
clean and straightforward for people.
Yeah.
But let me go find another one that's broken. That's maybe not the GitHub action or the token itself that's broke. Let's take a look at why I didn't do this. Okay, so 26 is still just not working. So this one's actually working. Here we go. Here's one that broke when running. So here I just didn't pass in the authentication piece correctly. And this was, I believe, still working with figuring out that GitHub token piece. But this is what happens if it gets this far and then trips over itself. It'll just throw whatever error message you would get, I believe, if you were trying to run it from your browser, which was something I was getting to the point where I started considering. Was I was going to just spin up a local node piece to run this. But the issue I found with that was this GitHub context piece would be missing. And I didn't really want to hard code these pieces, because this was actually where I was partially having the issue, was trying to find where in the context the owner login and the payload repository name was, which made this very frustrating because I had to keep like uploading it and then watching it fail slowly. And then I uploaded it again, try again. And I'm sure there's a better way to test this, but because this was the first time I was doing it, I was just doing it the brute force way that was working so far. If anybody knows how to do it a better way, I would love to find out. At least specifically the pull request ones. If there's a better way to do this, I very much would like to know. So let's look at where these all fit in now. So this is the repo where the action actually lives, but we're going to talk about it as if it wasn't a bit. So I create my repo. I throw up all my code. Cool. I want to add happy PR. What do? I'm going to start by opening or creating this .github/workflows/main YAML file. And this is where we, going back to that file, this is where we have that list of jobs. So we add in our jobs. We add a batch of jobs to run. We tell it to run on some operating system. There's an Ubuntu. I believe there's a Mac OS that might be behind a paywall, and then there's a Windows OS that you can use. And you have so many free hours of each with just by having a GitHub account. You add a name for the set of actions. So like the analyze mood of PR, we see that in here. That's where this is. So if we added we could add multiple like stages within this main YAML file, and those would all show up individually in here. So then we add our steps, and we tell it we want to run these steps, et cetera, as we talked about earlier. So once we have that going, and we tell it we want this to run whenever there's a new pull request, then the next time a pull request opens, under this Actions tab, we'll start to see all of our actions show up. So like here, you can see my all workflows group, and this is all of the times that any actions have fired off. So all of these are going to be pull requests that I've had. You can see what branch they are, and if you click into it, you can see that specific set of actions that ran. And then here we'll see the same thing. That was just a default pull request, so there wasn't actually any information there. So that's where you'll see the workflows. But what I think is cool about them is that you can apply them differently depending on what you want to do. So like some of the examples that were out there for the dev hackathon was like, one of them would be, you can tell it to run all of your test scripts within the pull request. So if you've ever worked with Netlify and deployed a site through them, which I highly recommend, but that's a separate talk. One of the things that you'll see sometimes is if you set it up, you can have it tell you, okay, here's, we tried to upload it to your site before you merge this pull request, and they'll tell you if there are any errors with the build process. And if there is, you can adjust that without having to merge it in and then find out once it doesn't update your site. So like you can build actions to run your specific set of test commands instead of having to use just Netlify's. So you can build your own, I believe Jest is one of them, or Cypress. You can have those run. Cypress might be a bad example because I don't know exactly how that would work within the context of essentially a Docker container. But like you can run all your Jest commands, and you can have it spit out any that fail, and then you don't have to worry about another person manually checking those. So like if I have an open open source project, and I have a set of 3 Jest scripts that need to run every time every time there's a pull request, you can have those run. And if any of them fail, you can have it like respond to the pull request and say, hey, this failed. Here was the error message. Here's what you need to like, and then it'll tell them like, hey, you need to go back and make sure this is working before you submit this again. And then to make that go even further is you can have that run in a way where you can pass in your own tokens from the secrets within GitHub. And then like if you need it to ping say you have your own test database set up, you can make sure it always hits that test database when those blocks run. And so like you can really go down this rabbit hole of like all the ways you can make this very specific to very specific projects, which is one of the coolest things I think about these, is just like all the different ways you could potentially apply this to do something more beneficial to your users than returning a gift to their pull request. So I think we're almost in the wrap up range. Are there any questions that you see? Or if anybody has any questions, now is a good time.
I guess a quick note, plussing what you were just saying. It seems like in the past, people were using Jenkins or Circle CI, like third-party tools to make those checks happen in GitHub PRs. But now there's a like a built-in way to do it.
Yeah, it's very similar
Yeah.
to those. I remember seeing those like when I first started working with GitHub more, and I was like, I really don't know what these are. But now that's actually a really good comparison, though, and now all of a sudden I understand how those worked. It's magic.
I was curious. Sorry, if you didn't if you meant to do this already. I was curious if you could walk through some of the docs like that you found helpful.
Sure. So the main way I figured these things out once it was working was by going to, and I've got to figure out where these are. I think the best example for GitHub Actions is to find one that does something similar and then use that as the jumping off point. Because it's going to kickstart you a lot faster than the docs will. Granted, you have to like kind of piece together how another person wrote their code, and they might not have documented it very well. In this case, like this action cats was a fairly straightforward block here. It's only 30 lines, so it was not too hard to get through. But I'm sure that there are some out there that are much more complex, have hundreds of lines of multiple modules like chaining together type thing. But I think this is the best, at least the way that I learned, this is like the best kind of example for me is, okay, here's the thing, and then how can we iterate on top of that? But looking through the GitHub docs themselves, this is the create a JavaScript option, which if I open up chat, I can drop that in a second. Is it, oh, you say you don't have Nightbot set up, so it's not going to kick me for dropping a link. Oops, but I need to mute that. Okay. So this one walks through everything from, it gives you a little bit of context about what the action is. It tells you any prerequisites for what you need. So like you need to make sure you have at least node 12 and npm. You need the to create a new repository or clone a repository then to your computer, get into that folder, and then run your npm init. If you're familiar with npm and packages already, this is going to be much easier to get through. But I don't think you actually need to know them. At least, but it'll make this a lot easier on you to not have to also be piecing that half of things together. So then it walks through like creating your metadata file, and then installing the actions/core actions/GitHub, which are those two base repositories that we were using to run our action and get that GitHub context item, and to get our the core functionality is like lets you do some of the stuff with actions. I don't think I actually used any. I don't know that I used any of these in my exact example, but these two are the like base set of functionality that they assume you're going to need at some point, depending on what you're trying to do. So then it walks through creating your first like hello world code. It tells you how to create the README. It gives you, this is actually was one of the best parts I think of this, was it gave you a really good starting point for the README. And READMEs are like the place where a lot of open source is really hurting, in my opinion. And to have a solid starting point baseline for actions was really, really helpful, especially because it meant that I was able to take this block, look over at the other people's projects, and they all had a very similar format. Obviously, this will change at sometimes over time, but having a similar base starting point was very helpful to make sure that I kind of understood what they were doing before I even looked at the code. And it also guides you through, here's how you should list your inputs that you're expecting. Here's how you should list the outputs that the user will see. And then you can list, here's the example of how to use this. So then it walks through And this was another new one for me, was this git tag. And within the PR, there's a list of tags, and these tags are basically like stopping points of your repository. And it lets you specifically reference a different version. So like if I created version 4 and tagged it, and I did something completely different with the action, people would still be able to reference v3 and use that with the way that things currently are, which is super cool. And I didn't realize how that worked until this either. I learned a lot more about GitHub through this than I kind of thought I would, even though I don't know what I was expecting since it was GitHub Actions as a project. But so it walks you through, though, all of the command line stuff. It tells you exactly what you need to do to get that ready. Now, the one piece, and this is specific to JavaScript as far as I know, where we were talking about that NCC command earlier to compile your code down. This is where it mentions it down here, but up here, up here, it's talking about adding your node modules and making sure it's not inside of your .gitignore file. And you don't want to do both of these things. You want to do either upload your node modules or upload with NCC. Theoretically, I guess you could do both, but you don't really want to be uploading and downloading your node modules if you don't have to, if you're going to use the NCC approach. And then it walks through, again, the commands to upload that if you use the NCC version. And then it walks through how to test it, how to add other actions. And then I believe that's done. So the only piece that isn't covered here that I a little bit touched on was the publishing piece. And when you're in a repository that you own, and it's not published, but it realizes that this is an action, it'll, instead of this blue box where it says to view it on the marketplace, it'll actually have a add to the marketplace button. And when you click that, it has a nice little like wizard you walk through where it will say, okay, what's the name of your action? Do you have an icon set? If so, it'll show you a preview. If not, it'll tell you, hey, you should add this to your metadata file. And it'll walk through all of that. It'll show you basically all the steps you need to take before you click that publish button to make sure that you're keeping secrets safe, creating a presentable action to users so that it looks nice and doesn't look like you completely made it up as you went, even though we did. And then like once you have all of those checkboxes checked, it'll say, okay, you can publish this action. You click publish, and then it magically shows up over here in a way that other users can come in and use it. And it like pushes your README through. I have an example of the GIFs response here in the README. It pushes all of that through. You can categorize it. You can it shows you how many stars the thing has. And then there's like the option to use it if you want to use it in your project. So that's kind of how that was basically the only page really I looked at in the docs. I looked a little bit, I guess, in this metadata syntax one, I believe, but I don't think it actually clarified anything. But I think those were the only two pages I actually looked at, really. I might have looked at like one or two other ones just to like grab a single, like to figure like a very specific thing out to when I was publishing it. But those were the two main ones that I would have looked at for building this.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much, Tyler. Quick question. How did you get the emojis in your commit messages?
Oh, so I don't know what it is on Mac or Linux, but in Windows. So I've started using this as my place, and it's Windows and colon, or I believe it's also Windows and period works. And it opens the emoji picker in Windows 10. And if
Nice.
you start typing, so like if we type smile, it'll filter down for you. And then it'll use that. The only catch is some of the Windows emojis are very specific to Windows, especially in, I believe it's like version 2024 or something like that. The 2004 rather. Like there's a cat on a dinosaur or cat on a rocket ship emote. And if you use those, it'll split it up into two when you actually push it to GitHub. We tried that. Which I would love to tell you more about this because I use the emojis. I've started using these in like everything I do because it's just so much easier to like pick apart the different things when I need to go back and find a commit. And this one I was kind of just picking some random emojis because I was just having a lot of fun with this project. I didn't really think it would get any attention other than getting me my stickers from the dev hackathon and learning something. But like in my portfolio site, I have it where like the sparkle icon is a CSS change. I use a paper document icon every time I publish a blog post. I'll use like a hammer or the box depending on what mood I'm in when I'm doing NPM package changes. And I use that as like a classification system so that it's really easy when I, especially internally at work, when I want to send out my changed log to users, I can very quickly look at the notes and say, okay, here's what I changed on this one. Here's what I changed on this one. Here's what I changed on this one. And then I can easily wrap that up in a way that I can explain it to them. And it just acts as a very good note system for myself, at least.
Yeah, that's awesome. It fights the problem of having too many text.
Yeah. It's kind of like wrapping, like some people will, I don't know if people ever actually do this for commits, but it's functionally the same as if you added a tag like this to your commit. So like it just saves you characters from having to do this, and it makes it a more visual approach too, which is easier for me to process, at least when I'm looking through the list.
So what are your plans for Action Happy PR?
I'd like to go through and figure out how to make it kick back the user's pull request if they have a certain negative window. And even more specifically, I would like to let the user specify in the inputs here. So like they can have multiple width items. And one of those that I want to put in is a width minimum number or minimum value, essentially, and that would be from -5 to +5, and then anything that's below that number, it would kick back to the user. That's the next thing I want to add to this if I ever find time to get back to it again. But who knows what else we could do with this. Like I said, this was really just a excuse to finally work with GitHub Actions and learn something about how they worked, because I really had no idea where they fit into GitHub when I started this. I just knew I wanted to use the sentiment analyzer, and then hopefully I was going to be responding to pull requests with a GIF visualization for the users.
Cool. Are there any shout outs that you want to share?
I mean, everybody should join CodeBuddies.
Besides CodeBuddies.
I guess I should at least shout out JTK for getting me involved in CodeBuddies in the first place. She grabbed me from the Code Newbies Slack because it wasn't very active and said, hey, you should come over here. And that's how I got started with CodeBuddies. So huge shout out to them for getting me involved. I guess that's probably it I would throw out here. I guess thanks to Natalie Codes for retweeting this when I shared it initially, because I believe that's where all of the attention came from. And it's all her fault that we got this far with this. But that's it. You can find me everywhere, Terabyte Tiger. Tomorrow, awesome. I'll even have my name spelled correctly on Twitch because I typoed it when I was changing my name.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching Natalie Codes, for following and chatting. JPK is also an admin on CodeBuddies, so thank you for helping with the moderate with the community. And of course, thank you, Tyler, for this walkthrough. It was super helpful.
Of course, I'd love to talk again sometime. We'll have to talk about how you got started with CodeBuddies sometime. And then I can ask the question.
Yeah, I'll share more about that later. Yeah, thanks. I will end the stream now. And yeah, I'm excited to share the video for this. Thank you.